if you cast your mind back, as we all can, to February of 2021 and the beginning of the Russian attacks, I guess it was 2020, the notion that the Russians had the physical power and the preponderance of strength and the money and all the other things to overwhelm Ukraine in a very short period of time, capture the whole country and maybe Moldova, was part of that current hyperbola, which has proved to be wrong. And then we noticed that at the time that the Ukrainians mastered the field in the direction of their counterattack, much later, they were expected to, in fact, as you said, using hyperbola, overwhelm the battlefield and emerge on top. Neither of that has been the case, and all of us, I think, should analyze the situation with caution, make our decisions on the basis of what we see in terms of reality, and support Ukraine, which is an American commitment to the greatest degree possible to avoid that kind of a cascading process working against Ukraine defending itself.
Firstly tonight, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has suspended all foreign trips to focus on his country's resistance to a Russian offensive in the Kharkiv region. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has announced an additional $2 billion in military funding whilst on a visit to Kyiv today.
We have, of course, the supplemental, and the assistance from the supplemental is on its way. In fact, some of it's already been delivered. But today I want to add to that by announcing that we will provide an additional $2 billion in foreign military financing for Ukraine. And we put this together in a first-of-its-kind defense enterprise fund.
Anthony Blinken, he was also spotted in a bar yesterday playing guitar in Kyiv. Well, earlier I spoke to Somalia Bobrovska. She is Secretary of Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Deputy Head of the Ukrainian delegation in NATO. She is in Kharkiv.
The front line is very aggressive with the offensive operation on the all front line, and I'm speaking not only about the new northern direction, where the Russians started their offensive operation just a couple of days ago, but in the east as well. I mean, first of all, about the Kupiansk and down through the region. I would say that's this endless story with the new mobilized people coming on the front from the Russian side. I would say it's very aggressive. It's very active. Their shelling on the ground, especially using the aerial bombs, which are using there very often, very randomly using on the region, on Kharkiv, on Kupiansk, on Izium, on the villages neighboring the front line. And I would say the situation can be very unexpected, turning in a very different situation.
Right.
Direction.
Yeah. And we heard earlier from General Chip Chapman, somebody who we speak to a lot for analysis, and he was saying, Solomia, that this feels very much like being back in June 2022, with Ukraine perhaps slowly losing ground to Russia. Is that your assessment of what's happening there?
Unfortunately, I would say the same. That's what we are now observing on the ground, unfortunately. And we understand more or less their plans. And what they're doing now on the northern side with the Vovchansk coming closer and closer, trying to come closer to Kharkiv. Yes, we understand that their plan was to get to Kharkiv like in one day again. And didn't happen, but still they are constantly moving forward. The same they're doing in the east of Kharkiv region, and the same they're doing in the Donetsk region, in Zaporizhia, and so on, trying to to make the line straight and finally to take Luhansk region totally 100%, then occupy Donetsk region the same, and even to take the part of Kharkiv region to be close to Kharkiv. And I would say to do the same as with Kherson, just constantly shelling and making people press and to move them out of the city. I would say.
Right.
I would say that's the main their goal for now.
Right. And what kind of pressure is that Solomon, are putting on Ukrainian forces, and in particular, use of resources and manpower?
I would say we are. I would say even more, like in 6, 7, 8 times, Russians have more advantage than Ukrainian side as well, and we still see only a few of the military aid on the airs on the front line on the field from Ukrainian side, unfortunately. That's what I'm observing even today, the whole day, coming from brigade to brigade, looking at the front line and the field, what's going on. But they are very persistent. They are very active. They don't have any lack of people. I would say even more. They are they are full of their reserve of people. Even their special regiments called that, the people who came from the trails. They're using them, so they just have only one direction, just to attack, not without any ways back.
Right. Right. And when you speak to them, Solomia, how is morale?
There is no any secret. People are very tired. People are very exhausted. Yes, we still have a problem with people on the front, in the brigades, in the assault regiments, battalions. It's still a challenge. And even despite the full process of mobilization, we need time to prepare people. It cannot be immediately, to bring in 30 days and to make from the civilian men well-trained soldier, for example. So I see that's the problem with the people. Yes, but people are exhausted. There is no, and I don't see even the light, at the end of the tunnel on the front. And I don't see how it can be just endless story. Even I don't have any mood to say something optimistic, unfortunately.
And so far as the community are concerned as well, Solomia, I mean, that clearly those on the front line who are fighting. But here we have the community of the Kharkiv region not unfamiliar with the violence of the last couple of years, but again, their lives being squeezed by a Russian offensive. What are they telling you?
I just can tell you about the villages and cities and small towns, as for example, as Kupiansk, and you will see only a few people just around on the streets. Some of them will tell you that they will never ever leave because they have their native houses and homes there, and that's not an option to leave, and they will be there till the end. Some of them are crying because that's for the second time they have to leave, and they understand the result that can be at the end, and the threat of occupation. So it's very heartbreaking stories, I would say, and unfortunately we are again and again facing the same things. And I would say that even in the other regions, as Sumy, for example, which is neighboring to Kharkiv region, people have to be evacuated by even force in the 5 kilometers from the border, for example, because sometimes life has to be matter more than just wish to stay at home.
Yeah, can't even begin to imagine how difficult a choice that must be for those people. Solomia, in terms of Volodymyr Zelensky, what we're hearing today, he has suspended all foreign travel. He was due to be in Germany later this week. He now won't be to focus on Ukraine's response to this offensive in the Kharkiv region. What do we make of that? I mean, there is the potential, isn't there, for Russia perhaps to exploit that as suggesting that there is panic, that Russia are really on the front foot here and Zelensky cannot leave.
I would say he made the right decision. That the priority has to be on the front line, and despite the very different messages from the Kharkiv region, I would take the situation very serious. They have resources and forces to attack again and to move at least slowly but forward in the Kharkiv region. Maybe there is not the aim to take, Kharkiv, and it's very hard. It's looks and sounds very now impossible and so on. But for us, it's very. If you're looking at map, as an option, it could be to cut at least a part of Kharkiv region to be closer to the city and to control the other part of the region. So I would say I will take this very serious, and I think that it was correct decision to stay here and to understand what's going on the field, what the intelligence saying about the possible offensive on Sumy region. So I think that the Supreme Commander-in-Chief has to be on the place.
Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has been in Ukraine today, Solomia, and has announced a $2 billion military funding package. What exactly do we understand that to be in real terms?
That's a very good question. You know, I'm trying for the second day to guess the message which Blinken brought probably to Kyiv, but you know, it's really hard. The Ukrainian media and Ukrainian discussion are all about his playing the guitar at one of the Kyiv bar, you know, in the evening after the official visit, and I would say it looked very strange.
It looks strange in what way?
I mean, you know, like when all Ukrainians and all our partners looking at the Kharkiv direction and on the front line where very, very, I would say, tough battles are. The state secretary supporting Ukraine with the playing the guitar. So I think that's the time, you know, that's the time to be very clear with messages, because at the end of the time we heard so much about that we are forbidden to strike on the Russian territory with the military partners aid. We are forbidden to strike the oil gas stations and so on the Russian side because it can destabilize, you know, economy and so on and so on. We still didn't get the military American aid on the ground, and that's why we're a bit confused about, you know, this. Trying to guess the message which Blinken brought to Kyiv, and this playing the guitar is it's really I would say like Ukrainians didn't understand what it was, you know, to be honest and very frank.
Solomia Bobrovska, Secretary of Committee of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Head of Ukraine's delegation in NATO in Kharkiv for us tonight. Well, let's speak to Thomas Pickering, who is a former United States ambassador to Russia and the United Nations. Thomas, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's just dwell on what Solomia was saying there. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, playing guitar in Kyiv at a time when Ukrainians are fighting for their life in the east. Was that a misstep?
I think I'm not a music critic. I don't really know. It's interesting to hear from obviously a qualified Ukrainian spokeswoman just a minute ago that it was either misunderstood or not understood correctly. The notion, I guess, was that he was trying to send a message that he would want to make a contribution. He would want to mingle with ordinary Ukrainians. He would want to have their views on what was going on and how and in what way he could perhaps reduce the sense of anguish at the Russian advance, as limited as it is, which is catching on here as something that is a significant threat to Ukraine in the media coverage and the press.
Okay. There is also this sense, I think, felt keenly in Ukraine, Ambassador, that this advance from Russia has happened as a direct result of dither from the United States on delivering an aid package. Do you buy that criticism?
It's hard to ignore that criticism, and those of us who, in fact, questioned those in the House of Representatives and the Senate who were blocking the aid package had that, as we, in fact, repeated that criticism and did what we could to persuade the administration that they had to go ahead with this. And I think that Secretary Blinken's visit now to Kyiv is important to reinforce the view that, as I know he will be saying, we're doing everything we can to open the line of supply as rapidly and as significantly as we possibly can, and that the $2 billion figure, I believe, as part of the $61 billion appropriation was mentioned as something we were focusing on making early deliveries of. support the Ukrainians who were fighting in this particular series of battles with less than the full support of the United States in terms of chain of supply.
Right. And war is full, commentary about war is full of hyperbole and conjecture. But based around that point, read an interesting article earlier that was arguing that it is now within Vladimir Putin's grasp to take Ukraine potentially within the next couple of months. I mean, firstly, do you agree with that analysis? And secondly, just how grave is the situation for Ukraine at the moment?
I don't agree with that analysis, but I'm not present on the spot and do not have a firsthand optic from which to make a judgment of that sort. I think it is important, however, that the United States pay attention to those kinds of analyses and do everything they can to reassure that it isn't the U.S. cutoff that is the responsibility for further Russian advances or overwhelming some or all of part of Ukraine. But if you cast your mind back, as we all can, to February of 2021 and the beginning of the Russian attacks, I guess it was 2020, the notion that the Russians had the physical power and the preponderance of strength and the money and all the other things to overwhelm Ukraine in a very short period of time, capture the whole country and maybe Moldova, was part of that current hyperbola, which has proved to be wrong. And then we noticed that at the time that the Ukrainians mastered the field in the direction of their counterattack, much later, they were expected to, in fact, as you said, using hyperbola, overwhelm the battlefield and emerge on top. Neither of that has been the case, and all of us, I think, should analyze the situation with caution, make our decisions on the basis of what we see in terms of reality, and support Ukraine, which is an American commitment to the greatest degree possible to avoid that kind of a cascading process working against Ukraine defending itself.
Okay. Can I take you to Slovakia? Prime Minister there, Robert Fico, currently fighting for his life tonight. He was shot earlier today. Officials there claim it was an assassination attempt. He, of course, has been pro-Kremlin, pro-Putin, and has moved the country's politics in that direction. What is your response to that tonight?
Well, we're going to have significant disturbances and upsets. And there are a number of countries in Eastern Europe whose leaders seem to favor Mr. Putin, or at least seem to be cozying up to Mr. Putin, perhaps on the basis that some kind of Putin success will take place here, and they're going to have to live with it. However much the analysis, it doesn't help, obviously, to see an exchange of assassinations become the order of the day and the way in which these particular problems are going to be battled out. But it appears as if, at least from this point on, there are people who are in that way so motivated and are likely to continue it on. And one can only hope that those leaders chosen by the people of their country will have adequate security to survive, but also have adequate good sense, if I could say so, to make decisions about the future that do not depend on the further proliferation of the use of force and the notion that battlefield victory is the only way in which these problems can be resolved. Okay. So far, we've had very little use of diplomacy. In the end, all conflicts are settled with political consequences. Political consequences, in my humble view, I'm a former diplomat, are best derived by parties sitting around a table working out what is in their mutual interest for a settlement of the problem and the cessation of killing and destruction, which now seems to be permeating not just that part of Europe involving the Ukraine, but the Middle East and portions of Africa as well.
Okay, just briefly, that would almost certainly, though, would it not, Ambassador, result in Ukraine surrendering some land to Russia?
I think that there are now people moving in that direction in their conclusions. I cannot say you're wrong, but I can say that both President Zelensky and President Biden have made it clear that at this point they do not seem to be motivated by efforts to resolve the problem, which will involve accepting that kind of serious degradation of their national interest.
Do you think that would be acceptable? If you were in the room, Ambassador, would you be advising Ukraine to surrender land, territory?
I think that at this stage, one would have to say to Ukrainians, it is up to you to make the decision as to what is the timing to stop the war and what are the conditions to stop the war, given the risk on one side that the Russians may be gaining. Secondly, that the death rates in this conflict are quite astounding and quite dangerous.
Sure.
For
That is,
countries' interest.
that is, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Ambassador, but I'm a bit tight on time. There will be people, though, Ambassador, who said that's defeat. That is a victory for Vladimir Putin, who will prove as an autocratic leader that he can simply march into a country and take at least some of it over. That wouldn't just be a defeat for Ukraine, it'd be a defeat for Europe, and by extension, the US.
By considering the realities, one has to be, in some ways, certainly not accepting of those conditions, but taking them into account in terms of what kind of an arrangement they may agree to in terms of stopping the war.
Okay.
And last thing I've said is collapse in favor of Putin's intervention. The most serious thing I've said is that leaders like President Zelensky need to evaluate the risks, the dangers, and the interests of their own country as they deal with this particular problem. And now is the time in their defense so they don't get put at the kind of disadvantage you've just described.
Okay.
And I sought to avoid depicting.
Okay. Thank you for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Ambassador Thomas Pickering, former US ambassador to Russia and the United Nations.